Now, imagine a whole year's worth of rain in less than or about 8 hours. That was exactly what happened in some parts of Spain in the last couple of days. And there's stories of people's last unsuccessful efforts to survive and some heartwarming, miraculous survival stories and rescue stories continue to trickle in. The question on the heart of a lot of people is what exactly caused this flash flooding? Or for those who are closer to the action, the question might be what is this gota fria, which is also translated as cold drop or dana as it is referred to? What is this thing that has been blamed for that flash flooding? That's one of the two questions I intend to answer in this video. The second question is climate change to blame? IMET, which is Spain's meteorological agency, actually reported Valencia had seen the most adverse cold drop of the century prior to the flood. Now, for countries in the Mediterranean area, talking about Spain and France, the people are quite familiar with heavy downpours in autumn. And DANA is actually an acronym for four Spanish words that I would try, maybe unsuccessfully, to pronounce. But I think it's pronounced Depressió Aislada en Niveles Altos. And that is translated as isolated depression at high altitude. And the clue is actually in the name. And so, in trying to answer the first question, what is cold drop? That's what we're going to be, how we're going to be referring to it going forward. I'll save you the stress of saying the Spanish word. I would try to explain that, but to really understand that, we need to understand the concept of polar jet, which is just a stream of fast flowing air or wind in the polar region of the Earth. Now, I've got some props to help us explain that a bit. So just a quick reminder of some of our geography that we may have forgotten. So that's supposed to be the Earth, and I'm sure you will know we are on the Earth. Along the polar axis, and if you assume that this is the sun, the ray of the sun coming from here, so the polar jet is a cold and fast flowing stream of air around this axis. Now, looking at the shape and the structure and the relationship between the Earth and the sunlight, I'm sure you would understand that these areas, which is the tropical areas, would be warmer than the polar areas. So oftentimes you have cold air or wind in this region flowing in the west-east direction. So that's the polar jet, what we refer to as the polar jet. And ordinarily, that would be flowing in a predictable pattern or order. And so when that cold air comes in contact with the warmer air that is rising from the equatorial area upwards in this direction, then we can begin to talk about the cold drop. So hopefully, with this image in mind, you will be able to understand a bit more when we go into the details of that. So normally, high-level winds in the atmosphere follow this predictable pattern. It should normally happen at heights between 9 to 16 kilometers above ground. It should travel from west to east in speed of about, say, 100 to 180 kilometers per hour. But sometimes this pattern gets disrupted. And this happens when a large mass of cold air from the northern region moves south. It can then come in contact with warmer, humid air from the regions like the Mediterranean Sea, where obviously the higher temperature would mean the air rising from that region will be warmer. Now, if this cold air detaches from the main atmospheric flow, it forms an isolated low pressure area high above the surface. This detached area, cool, dense, and moist, often acts like a drop within the warmer surroundings, which is why we call it the cold drop. So hopefully that answers the first question of how cold drops are formed. Now, the next question then becomes, is climate change to blame? And the honest answer to that question is, we haven't gotten to that point where we can give a yes or no answer to that question, because things would have to be analyzed, and then after some time we would be able to tell certainly. But let's look at the indicators and the current pointers that we have. Number one, you cannot have rising temperature without seeing a disruption in these patterns that I've explained already. And one thing we won't be able to dispute is that the temperature of our planet has been rising consistently. So that's point number one. Point number two is human behavior has also contributed. So I've just told you that we had a whole year's worth of rain in 8 hours or less. In natural settings where we have not, where we don't have pavements everywhere and we don't have concrete structures stopping water from getting into the soil, the earth would have been able to absorb some of those rainfalls naturally. But in situations where we have fast developing cities where roads have been tarred, pavements everywhere, concrete structures, the rate of infiltration drastically drops. And so when such heavy rainfall takes place, the risk of flooding is high. So we can begin to merge these things together and begin to see that yes, once we're able to analyze data and all of that, we'll be able to tell certainly if climate change has played a role. But the things we can definitely not deny is that the frequency and the extent or the strength of these natural phenomena has drastically increased along with the increase of temperature. So if asked that simple question, is climate change responsible? I can say yes to an extent. And so these floods are a tragic reminder of how vulnerable we are as humans. We are totally vulnerable to the climatic forces. And it's also a wake-up call for most of us that we can start rethinking how we build. We can start rethinking the everyday things that we do, and also how we prepare for these things that are becoming inevitable. Now, we're talking about this is happening not too long after Hurricane Milton, Hurricane Helene, and all of these things that are happening across the world. So instead of trying to debate if it's climate change or if it's not climate change, we can actually start taking measures to reduce all of this. So hopefully, following this video, you would be able to an extent, explain what Dana is, and then you might also be able to say that climate change, to an extent, would definitely play a part in what is happening. So, thank you for watching. Please share, leave a comment, and stay tuned for more eco insights. Cheers.